All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator at Murder by the Book in Houston. I feel like this is one of the first events I've done since the time changes happened. So it's actually light in my living room. I don't even have to have my ring light on at the moment. I'm sure that'll change as the course of the evening, but it looks so much brighter in here doing these. So I see people are popping in already. I'm going to bring Patty and Chelsea out in just a second, but while everybody is finding us from their various corners of the internet, I wanted to make a couple of general announcements. As I said, I'm John McDougall. I am the event coordinator at Murder by the Book in Houston. If you guys are unfamiliar with us, we are one of the country's oldest and largest mystery bookstores. We also have a really healthy urban fantasy section in the store. I'm kind of the resident urban fantasy reader. I've actually been coming to, when we'll get started, I'll tell the story, but so I've actually been coming to Patricia Briggs events at Murder by the Book since before I worked at Murder by the Book. Back about 10 years ago, I had a blog and would come to events and then blog about them afterwards. And that's how I started to kind of get to know the people at the store. And so at one point I showed up at a Jim Butcher signing and they were like, hey, if you ever think about leaving Murder by the Book, or if you ever think about leaving Borders, where I was working at the time, give us a call. And now I'm at Murder by the Book. So urban fantasy is kind of the thing that kind of helped lead me to the store and helped me find my place there. So I'm so excited for tonight. But I also wanted to mention before we get started, we have had a few issues on Facebook with spam comments that occasionally pop up. So if you see any comments that pop up that say, hey, to watch this event, click here and give us your credit card information, don't do that. You're already watching the event. You don't have to click a link to take you away from it to watch it. I will block them and delete them as soon as they pop up. But sometimes people can get them just a little bit quicker than I'm able to. So don't fall for that. Don't click on those. You're already watching the event. Patty was gracious enough to sign some copies of Wild Sign for us. So we do still have a few signed copies left at the store. I'll drop a couple links in the chat so you'll be able to know where you can order those. And we'll talk a little bit about this more too, but Chelsea Mueller's book Prom House comes out May 4th, and she is going to be signing and personalizing books for us too. So as we're chatting, if you're more interested in hers, I'll drop some links for that too. You can order those. Wanted to mention, we also just relaunched another bonfire campaign for Murder by the Book t-shirts. So if you're interested in those, again, I'll post the links for those as well. And also wanted to mention, we've got Martha Wells, who writes the Murderbot series, coming up doing a virtual event with us in May. So lots of really cool stuff. Check out murderbooks.com and you can find out all of the great author events that we've got. And also while you're on YouTube or Facebook, you can check out our live video feeds and see the over 200 author events that we've done since the pandemic started. So there's kind of a really great wealth of material out there to view. So I'm going to bring our guest in so we can get started. I'm going to start with Chelsea Mueller. How are you tonight, Chelsea?
I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for doing this for us.
I'm very excited. I love Patty's books, so I'm excited to talk.
Yeah, so Chelsea and I have known each other on Twitter, and we've been able to meet in person and conferences and stuff like that, but we've known each other on Twitter for, gosh, probably 10 years now too. And I know that in addition to being an urban fantasy author, she's also a huge fan. So when we were chatting about setting this up with Patty, I immediately thought, hey, I think it'd be really fun to have the two of them in conversation. So I'm excited for this. So to get Chelsea officially introduced, Chelsea Mueller writes gritty, twisty fantasy and thriller novels for adults and teens. She loves bad cover songs, good fight scenes, and every soapy YA drama Netflix can put in her queue. She lives in Texas and has been known to say y'all. So as we mentioned,
all the y'all.
Yeah, I say y'all all the time. Every time I talk to my family that lives up in Delaware, they're like, you say y'all a lot. I'm like, yep, we do. We do. And so, as I mentioned, we're going to be chatting with Patricia Briggs for her new book, Wild Sign. We're going to bring her out. How are you tonight, Patty?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you.
It's so weird.
Yeah, it's not as much fun as being down in Texas, but hey.
Yeah, next time. And you had the unenviable, and that's not the word I'm looking for, unenviable task of your book came out just as kind of everything was hitting and starting to get canceled last year. So I think that yours was one of maybe the first two events that we had that got canceled. So I'm so glad we're able to actually be up and running, do virtual stuff so we can see you this way.
This is so much fun. Yeah. Ann Bishop went out the week before and they canceled her very last event. And Sparky and I, my assistant and I, sat there and we stressed about whether to go or not to go and whether to go or not to go. And as it turns out, we should not have stressed at all because by the time we would have been going, everything canceled. So
Yeah, there was a good, I don't know, like 2 week period at this time last year where I was just afraid to walk to my computer and check my email because it was just canceled event, canceled event, canceled event. And I was
Yeah.
looking at my like Facebook memories from like a year ago where we'd shared a store post and we'd had like one event that was scheduled for the end of March. So everything was like canceled, 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 canceled. James Rollins, March 28th. We think this is still happening. And we all laugh so hard now at the optimism that we thought that, by the end of March, we would be able to do this again.
Yeah, it was just going to be a week, right? A couple of
Yeah.
weeks and we'd be all over and no problem because we'd had other pandemic scares that were just a couple of weeks long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but the upside to the pandemic is that we get to do stuff like this. We get to pair up authors that we wouldn't necessarily get to pair together. We get to see people that we haven't chatted with in a while. So we're so excited to do this and tonight to talk about Wild Sign. So if anybody is watching and unfamiliar, Patricia Briggs is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Mercy Thompson novels, Smoke Bitten, Storm Cursed, and Silence Fallen, among others. Her Alpha and Omega novels include Burn Bright, Dead Heat, Fair Game, Hunting Ground, and Cry Wolf. She lives in Washington State with her family and a small herd of horses.
Growing bigger. It's pretty big now.
And as we mentioned, we've been really lucky to host Patty in the store multiple times, both with Ann Bishop. We were able to host a really cool joint event with her and Kim Harrison a couple of years ago. So we're so excited to be able to do this virtually. I'm going to turn my camera off and let these two ladies chat for just a little bit. But if you guys are watching, if you have questions, you can post those in the comments. Here's my general blanket warning. I know the book came out Tuesday. People are still getting their signed copies. We got ours Thursday and we're getting them shipped out. Please don't ask spoilery questions in the comments. And my tip is if you're not sure whether or not your question is a spoiler, it probably is. So we want to make sure that people that haven't picked up the book yet can still read it spoiler free. So again, you can post those comments in the questions in the comments on Facebook and YouTube, and I will relay those in a little bit. So I'm going to pop away and I will see you guys soon.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I have read Wild Sign.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, so I'm up to date, and it was it's good. It's so good. Everybody who's like, if you're watching, very satisfying. And I think too a nice start of a new arc. I'm feeling like you have some big plans.
Plans is such a strong word. No, actually it isn't. It's fine. It's fine. Jane Yolen, a couple of years ago, I was sitting with her and she described the way I write as into the mist. And I like that a lot because pantser sounds like I really don't know what I'm doing. And I do, but I don't outline. I don't know everything. I just have like these waypoints along the way, things that I know that are going to happen, but I don't know when they're going to happen. The epilogue at the end of this book, for instance, and I'm being non-spoilery, I knew about that about 4 books ago, and I've been trying to figure out where to stick it in until I got to the end of this book. I thought, this feels right. This is the right place to put it. Right?
Yeah. That's kind of interesting because I do kind of the tent post thing too, but for that book. And then sometimes I'm just surprised by myself. Like, oh wait, I did put this seed earlier, and now is the time to bring that back.
Sometimes it kind of feels like your subconscious is smarter than you are, right? When you're writing, yes. I look back through Wild Sign and I see the things that I built up for it for other books, and I had no idea that's what I was doing. It's serendipity and says, I think it's just I think subconscious for writers. I think subconscious is a real and useful tool.
Do you think, so there's a lot of Easter eggs, we'll say, in your books. Like if somebody were just an Alpha Omega reader versus just a Mercy Thompson reader, both of those series would be satisfying without having read the other. But if you've read both, there are all these like little pieces that you've dropped in that are like, ooh. And are those woo pieces you were in the middle of it and like, oh, I could share this, or were those seeds that you've kind of planted of like, I want to make sure that these things are stitched together?
So in the world that is in my head, I'm really sorry. I have a big dog and lots of cats that are kind of, 2 cats that are kind of coming around and joining us and with noises, and I apologize. But no, in the world that is inside my head, where the world is a little more real than my real world is, where these books exist, I run them just like what would how they work how they would work in reality.
Mhm.
And then I kind of pick and choose what I put on the pages. But if I, so if you're reading, my goal is to do exactly what you said, which makes me feel very good that that's working, at least it worked for you, is that if you're just reading one series or the other, you don't feel like you're left out.
Mhm.
But if you're reading both series, it really feels like these people interact with each other, and this world is the same world. And the events of one book actually impact, insofar as they impact the way everybody lives, they also impact the other book. So things like in Dead Heat, not Dead Heat, Fair Game. In Fair Game, Charles and Anna get sent to Boston because Adam won't leave Mercy because she got hurt in River March. So people read River March, they go, aha, that feels like a real thing. Whereas if I had just had them bouncing around, the consequences of the books have to be real consequences, and they have to exist from one book to the other. So I don't know, it's fun.
It is fun. Although, when you say that, immediately my mind's like, so are you ever tempted to just like, we get peeks at each other, and are you ever tempted to just do like a super friends, type everyone?
A reunion book where everybody gets to jump in. I think that I am not nearly as good enough writer to do that. I have read them. I have. There are several series that have done them over the years, and most of the time, the writers are better than me, and it's not a fun experience for me as a reader. So I'm really, really wary about doing that. Throwing two characters that are not normally together in the series, that's fun. I mean, I think Asil and Warren would have a lot of fun, or kill each other, one of the two. It's hard to say. That kind of mix up, or just have Anna and Mercy go on an adventure. That would be fun. Yeah. Charles and Adam might not be so smart. I don't know, but yeah, taking two of the characters that you don't normally see them together. I threw Asil in. I can see the cover. Frostburned. Asil came over in Frostburned, and Charles was in Bloodbound and also Mooncalled. I don't know that other than that, Samuel's the character that bounces around most easily between the two series, and Brian. So we'll have fun.
Definitely. Speaking of extra characters, Brother Wolf is particularly chatty in Wild Sign.
He is, and it floored me. It took me a while to figure out. I liked it. I left it in there, and I thought he's not that way. So I went back through and I thought, well, why would he be like that? Rather than taking all the chattiness out, why would he suddenly become so chatty? And I thought, oh, I know. And so I put that in there, and it's part of the development of characters, and it's part of the development of relationships, because relationships change over time. And some of it is just the particular scene that I'm working on needs another voice, or it feels like it needs another opinion, or both my characters in the scene are being real obstinate, so I have to bring somebody else in. And it kind of surprised me when it was Brother Wolf, but hey, so that works.
Or like with Sherwood when he popped up in your dream.
Or like Sherwood. Sherwood was a character, Sherwood Post from the Mercy Thompson series, and then he shows up briefly in this book. Was a character that I dreamt about. I dreamt a whole short story about him, and that's why I brought him in. And when I brought him in Fire Touch, I had a lot of professional reviewers who were going like, why did this character come in? He didn't really do anything to contribute anything to that storyline. I'm like, oh, but he's got to get there before Bran cuts off Mercy's path from everybody else. Sherwood has to be there. So, so sometimes it's I don't know. Writing a long running series is so much more. You can do a lot of things you can't do in a standalone book. So you can not everything that you bring into the book has to push that plot line forward. If you have another idea for them later on when they have to be established in that group. So it's fun. I like it. I'll I will, if I ever decide to write a standalone book again, and I suspect that I will really miss having having this freedom.
I can see that. You know, it's interesting talking about, you know, the relationships evolving and growing and how people interact changing. Because one of the things that I actually really love about most of my favorite urban fantasies, our running series, have either really established couples or married couples.
Yeah.
And I think it's something unique to urban fantasy. I had a friend who described it as, you know, you read these books and they are grown-ass adults having grown-ass problems, and solving them like adults. And I was like, well, I kind of love that. And I think that it works really well when you have such chaos outside of their relationship in a book, of big problems to solve. But I was kind of curious what you think really works about having Charles and Anna as this kind of rock of relationship at this point.
Well, you know, I think it's easier to write a book in which you are introducing introducing a relationship, because everybody's interested in that first moments of relationships. And I don't know that I would have been brave enough to do what I'm doing. I'm not sure how else I would be able to have done it anyway. But J.D. Robb did it with her.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many books are in that series now, over 40, I think. The index.
Yeah.
What? How much?
51, I believe.
51 books, and every one of them is good. And they were married, I think, by book 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
And the romance is an ongoing romance between Dallas and Rourke. Thank you. The romance between Dallas and Rourke is still as powerful a force in those books as it was from the very first books. And part of that secret is that she's not writing romances Nora Roberts isn't writing romances in that series. She's writing mysteries with a romantic touch. And I think the same thing goes with urban fantasy. We're writing urban fantasy with a romantic touch, because urban fantasy is kind of it's a mashup genre, right? We have horror and we have fantasy, and we have a thriller, and a social commentary is a big thing in it. A little bit of noir, a little bit of romance, and it all mixes up together. And urban fantasy has an advantage over paranormal romance, because in a long-running series with paranormal romance, eventually you have to just do one couple per book. And after a while, that feels pretty, you get a repetitiveness to the plot lines that you cannot avoid. Whereas urban fantasy, because the romance can be on the sidelines, you can play around with it a bit more, and a bit maybe, and the temptation is to go soap opera-ish and have people go in and out of relationships in the books. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that for me, that's not very satisfying. And for me, in the real world, the best relationship is one that has had a chance to grow. So my husband and I were married for 30 years before he passed away. And every year was better than the one before. Every year we knew each other better. We were closer. We had, different interactions. And I think it's a really sad thing in traditional books that we tell everybody that the best part of a relationship is the beginning. And it's not at all. It's not at all. The best part of the relationship is today, right? So I'm really grateful to be writing in a genre that allows me to do that. It's, again, one of the wonderful things about a long-running series is that I get to do that. I get to build these relationships. And the relationship between Charles and Anna in particular is one that I found a real challenge, because Charles is almost 200 years old. He might be 200 years old now. When I started, he was almost. He's almost 200 years old. And Anna is not even 25 at the beginning. She is a baby. I mean, she's had to grow up fast, and she's tough and she's smart. But she's a baby, and it would be really easy to have their relationship be very uneven. You know, I will protect you from everything. Rescue the princess kind of relationship, and that's really unhealthy.
Instead, she pulled out her rolling pin.
There you go. Anne says instead she pulled out her rolling pin, right? to protect him from the bad guys. And this, it took me a long time, a long time planning wise, to figure out how I was going to negotiate that and make it a real worthwhile, a real good, solid relationship that I didn't have, as a writer, didn't have to say, yeah, I know this is a terrible relationship to demonstrate, but hey, what can I do? And the secret to me was Charles. It was in the way he viewed Anna. He did not view Anna as somebody who needed rescuing. He viewed her as somebody who rescued him. And that changed the dynamics of their relationship to the point where I'm very happy with it. I'm very happy with where they are right now, and I think that they have left me a lot of places to go with that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that kind of struck me, particularly in Wild Sign, was almost that they've hit this point where it feels like they're like a pair of investigators, like buddy cop. In some of those scenes where they're trying to solve something and Charles does something that Anna would be like, why are we doing this? But then is willing to look at him and be like, I'm giving you the look, you're going to explain this, but I know you well enough to know that this is a good call. So I'm just going to play it. And I think that that's something that really can only be sold if you've built up a strong relationship where we believe that kind of trust.
Thank you. I agree. And it's really fun to come to that place in their relationship. And the odd thing is, I don't think that really Mercy and Adam are there yet in their interactions for various reasons. But Anna and Charles are a real partnership, and there's a lot of trust involved, and there is a lot of respect, mutual respect, and understanding where each other's strong points are, and when to let one of them run, and when to switch back to the other one. So it's really fun to do. What we do, you and I, telling stories, is just it feels like I get up every morning and I pinch myself that I get to go play with my imaginary friends for the day instead of really going to work, right? So.
Yes, definitely. Although, it's one of those, we explain to people that, what do you do with your day? And it's like, well, I am either building a world, or maybe we're killing some people, or we're solving crime, or maybe people are kissing, it's like all the good stuff.
Our writers group had a moment. We were eating lunch together. We'd eat lunch and then we'd read each other's work, and the poor restaurants, that was back pre-COVID. They would let us sit there, and we tried to go kind of an off time so that we weren't taking up tables where there were actual people actually eating. But we were all sitting around trying to figure out a good way to hide a body. And I think it was Anne, Sparky, my trusty assistant, started going, hey, hey, hey. And we looked over, and sitting next to us were a couple of police officers just listening. I think they figured it out, but it was.
But they were very interested.
They were very interested in where we would hide the bodies. Idaho, or the bottom of the hole in the bottom of the Columbia River. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I almost wonder who left first. Like, did the writers have to leave before the cops, or did they linger?
No, the cops left. The cops left first. Yeah,
we always all left it every morning.
Yeah, we waited till the police officers left the parking lot before we scuttered out.
Why? Oh. So, speaking of writing habits, I mean, I think there was a lot of fun stuff like that, pre-COVID. What is your writing like now? Like, what's your process like? Is everything still the same? Are there things that you miss? Is it going to mess with your?
So yeah, there's some good things and bad things. I mean, one of the good things was I didn't travel a lot this year. So I had a lot of time to sit down. I'm working on the next Mercy book, and I have it all plotted out in my head, and I had time to play with ideas, and I should get it done in June instead of October, which means my editor will be happy with me instead of pulling her hair out. Right. So that helped. What didn't help is I started writing, Wild Sign takes place in Northern California. Now, I have been to Northern California. I have driven through Northern California, but never with the idea I was going to write a book there. So my plans were that I was going to drive down after the book signing tour in March. I was going to drive down to Northern California and hang out in Happy Camp.
We were going to camp.
We were going to camp. We were going to float the river.
You were going to float.
I was going to float the river. We were going to run around on trails. We were going to have a lot of, we were just going to have a lot of fun. And COVID hit, and I'm waiting. I thought, well, I'll wait a couple months. I should be able to just get over there for the weekend. What if I drive? If I drive there and then stay in my car and drive back? And finally, I just had to throw up my hands. So all of the details in Northern California that are in Wild Sign are things that I knew beforehand, things that I could look up on, Google Earth with my friend. There is a really, really bad found footage film called Happy Camp that Sparky and I will never get that hour and a half back. It is the worst found footage.
I should have had alcohol.
It was the worst found footage horror story I've ever seen. It was terrible, but it was filmed in Happy Camp, so I got to go around and see how all the Happy Camp, what it looked like in relation to each other, and then Google Earth showed me what the maps were. And diaries. I had USGS maps. I had a couple books written by self-published authors that live around there that described things, so to kind of make it feel real. But in the end, I think that I love how it turned out. But I think that it would have been a little better if I could have gone up there and picked out some just. What it smells like, what the ground under your feet feels like, to make it different from, a generic forest, that kind of thing.
You just wanted to go whitewater rafting.
Yeah, and I just wanted to go whitewater rafting, darn it, and I didn't get to.
Do you think that you'll go there at things open back up? Will you go and see how much it feels like what you thought it was going to feel like?
I don't know. Only if I'm going to do another book there, because I think that if I go there, just think that. So if I go there and it's just right, I go, oh, look, I did it all right. Why am I here? Yeah. Or if I go there and I did it wrong, I'll go, oh, that's awful. I can't believe I did that, and go hang my head and feel bad. So maybe not.
Well, I reading the books, I've always thought that you went to places, because I used to live in Arizona, and even just the way that you described going into Westworld in one of the earlier books, I was like, I knew exactly where you were. I knew exactly what things. I was like, she's been there, and she's been there a lot.
That's part of writing urban fantasy, right? Because the setting is part of the story, and you have to get the setting right. The real things in the book have to feel real. And they have to feel real to people who've been there. They have to feel real to people who haven't been there in order to sell the rest of the story. If I tell you absolutely the truth about what Westworld looks like, or about what Northern California looks like, then you have to believe me about the werewolves, because obviously I know what I'm talking about, right?
Yep. So it seems like, werewolves are staying in, but it's interesting to see from an urban fantasy standpoint, books that are coming out now, different, there's always been kind of this here's what creature is interesting, and we're seeing some resurgence of that with new voices. But I also thought it was interesting, the world where we're looking at werewolves as main characters, but we've had vampires, we've had witches, we've had fae. There's some new surprises in store. Have you thought about how you would expand the world, how you decide what creatures you may or may not welcome into your world?
So part of it is place, right? If my characters decide that they're going to travel to Africa, or if they're going to travel to somewhere that the supernatural world will be different, then of course the creatures they run into are going to be different. Or maybe they'll have somebody traveling, like Thomas Howell, the vampire from Butte, right? So I kind of let those stories play themselves, and I use the creatures that I think that are going to work for that particular story. But ultimately, really, all of my books are about the people. All of my, the Mercy books are about Mercy and Adam and the pack, and the Alpha and Omega books are about Charles and Anna and the world they live in. And the monsters and the creatures and the things that they face are really not as important as the people in the stories. All stories are about people. So I am open to anything, but I'm not interested in doing this is another monster. This is another monster. This is another monster books. Even though I like reading those just fine. That's fine. But I don't mind bringing up old villains. I don't mind bringing up old situations. I have several things building now. We have in the Mercy series, we have Underhill, who is creepy and has things going on. We have Bonarata, who's got things going on. We have the Hardesty Witches, who are obviously evil, and they show up sort of in Wild Sign again. That's not a spoiler. There are, so there are things that I can bring back in ways that don't feel like I'm revisiting the same story over and over again. I am easily bored. I am easily bored. I try really hard not to bore anybody else, but the first person I'm going to bore if I start telling the same story over and over again is myself. So hopefully I won't ever do that. I don't like to promise things, but I'll try really hard not to write the same book twice.
So what about one of the things that is interesting is the idea of a disappearing city. And I'm kind of curious how that came to you, where you maybe drew some ideas for that one.
So I don't remember, I don't know if you do this. I talk to other writers who do this. I go out and, especially at the beginning of the book, I just let my imaginations run on the internet. I'll start on one Wikipedia article and I go, oh, I don't know what that is. And I'll follow these little trails all the way through the internet into some very weird places. And that's usually where a lot of my really good, interesting stories happen. So I'm going to, I totally lost my train of thought. I was playing with the internet again. What was the topic of your question? The
hidden city and the idea of a disappearing city.
Yeah, so that was because I ran into Roanoke again. And, I'm a history major. Every American who studied history, Roanoke is the weird one, right? What happened to the people in Roanoke? And I thought, that's really creepy. And then I kind of let my subconscious work on that. I thought, you know what? I've hiked a lot out in the mountains. When I was a kid, we used to ride horses all over the mountains in Montana, and there's some really creepy places up there. And the idea of somebody, we used to ride down, there were abandoned log houses out in the middle of the woods where you didn't know, and they were, some of them were abandoned with everything. There were, they just picked up and left, and they left everything behind. And it was always creepy. And I thought that might be a really good place to start the story and see what happens. And so that's how Wild Science started.
Like it. Trying to make sure I don't give spoilers. I have some specific questions. Well, I guess one of the things that that's a spoiler too. I have a whole, this is the downside of me reading the book this week. So, don't think it's a spoiler that we get more of Tag in this book.
I think that's...
Yeah. So what is it that you think is the most fun about writing him? Because we do get a little bit in his point of view.
He is, he's a berserker, and not the same way that Bran is a different kind of berserker. Tag is a more traditional kind of berserker. When he gets mad, he just kills things, beats things up until everything stops moving, or he does.
He was berserker before he got turned. Right?
Yeah, he was a berserker before he got turned. So that's part of his story. I like pulling out characters that I know a lot more about than the readers do. Again, a long-running series allows me to have so much fun. Some characters walk on the stage and I know so much about them that I can't put in the book because it's the wrong book, or it's, I don't want them to be the point of attention, and there's no real way to bring it out. And so when I get a chance to do something like this, where Anna and Charles are going off to face something pretty scary, And Bran knows what it is. And I knew that he wouldn't send them alone, that he had to send, that he didn't want them, didn't want them to face it alone. And to send, one of the wolves he had in his pack. And I've dealt so much with a seal, I thought it'd be fun to try somebody else. So I pulled Tag out because he's really fun. Every time he shows up, he just, he's got bright orange hair, he's got a big beard, he's
Joy to be.
yeah, the joy of life is strong in that one, and also killing rages, and one of my favorite scenes. Yeah, right. So one of my favorite scenes was when Tag was swinging by his knees from the trees, right? In Burn Bright. So I had so much fun with him in Burn Bright. I thought I would bring him back out and let him play a little bit longer.
Speaking of favorite scenes, do you have one that's spoiler free that you want to talk about?
Oh, that's hard.
I have a favorite scene, but I realized it was spoilery. So
Right. Okay, so I will say that I inadvertently ran into the creepiest place that I have ever created in my entire career of writing books, which now spans almost 30 books, I think, in that category. And it was totally by accident. And it happened because I had a bag with letters in it, and I needed more letters than belonged to just one person. So I put two people's letters in it, and I just randomly picked out two things those letters could be about. And I thought, oh, they're going to have to follow up on those. And that led to creating this really creepy, awful place. And it's my favorite thing probably in the book is that place. And came totally out of the blue. That's one of those Into the Mist, lucky moments that happen occasionally when you're writing a book. And when they happen in the middle of a book, I always know that the book is going to be good, because if it surprises me, it's going to surprise readers. And I have to say, I've had nightmares about it a couple of times. So that was fun. It was fun.
See, this is what I enjoy, because my favorite thing in the book is this thing you said you still could give you nightmares. And it was your favorite thing too, which is such an urban fantasy author thing to say.
I confess, I have not swum in a non-swimming pool environment since I wrote River Mart. Yeah. You never know what's down there.
Well, it's interesting because, as we said, the place is so vitally important in urban fantasy. It's a character, and it's also what makes you buy into everything else. But then sometimes part of that, you get to create these places that are powerful and scary, and that really stick, and have that kind of sticky in the back of your brain feeling, because everything else is real and familiar. It's that same, I'm going to buy into this, and that twist in our world.
Well, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
That place in a place in which there are certain supernatural beings. I'm trying really hard not to be spoiler. In a place in which there are supernatural beings who that place has to exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Are there places that you've created in previous books that still really sing to you when you think about them?
For sure. Underhill is so much fun to play with, because it can be anything, or she can be anything. I really I don't know, maybe not so much in the urban fantasy ones, other than the one we were talking about, because they tend to be real places. Yep. So they're real places that resonate with me, like Mary Hill, the replica of Stonehenge in Mary Hill, that kind of place. But that's a real place, so it resonates with me. But it resonates with me for more than just the reasons that I wrote it into the book, right? But some of the rooms that I wrote into the Raven's Shadow, Raven's Strike, when they were the second book, which would be Raven's Strike. you know, I'll dream about them sometimes at night, and I'll feel really familiar. I'm going, why am I walking through this really creepy room? What's going on here? And then I'll wake up and go, oh, that's from that book. You know, so that happens. And I'm not even sure if I wrote this in Masks and Wolfsbane. Those are my first and third book that I ever wrote. And there is a cave system that Wolf has lived in that I know a lot about that I didn't put in that's another place I revisit quite often. So that's cool. That's a cool question. Thank you.
I'm here to help. I don't know. I'm just an urban fantasy nerd. You know, the other thing that's interesting, you know, so much of urban fantasy is, you know, solving a mystery, crime, doing that in our own kind of outside of the box way. The FBI makes a real brief appearance in Wild Sign. They've been more present, not present. Do you have plans to parallel some more there? Will we see more interaction, or is that also a spoiler of your plans?
So yeah, they are tools in my crafts box, the FBI agents, both of the ones that appear in Wild Sign. And if they make sense for the story, they'll come in. And there were the pair of FBI agents from Dead Heat, in the one in Arizona, that I really liked too. The one of them is a changeling. And I'm sure that they will come back in. It just has to be the right story for them. I usually start out a story. I have it's Mercy or an Anna and Charles book, and then I have the general plot line. And I will spend maybe 2 or 3 weeks thinking about the general plot line and figuring out who I'm going to populate this book with. And sometimes I'll change my mind halfway through it, and I'll go, okay, this character really doesn't have anything to do, and I'll just get rid of them. Well, who else could I bring in? Oh, that's kind of an interesting twist, and I'll throw them in. The nice part is that in Wild Sign, because it made sense to have the FBI there, and because it made sense as a way to tie that book into the Mercy books and into the things that are going on in a world building sense, they made sense to bring them in. You know, sometimes I pull them in so that it makes the world feel real. This is what would happen in the real world. And it doesn't matter if the person who picked up Wild Sign hasn't read it before. They'll say, okay, they get enough of who they are that it should feel okay. But if you have read, you know, a lot of books with my FBI agents in them and enjoy them, then you get then here's an Easter egg for you.
So you have a lot of tools in your toolbox in terms of characters. 30+ books, so you have lots of people you can pull from. How do you keep track of everyone?
That is a really good question. I have a canon that is, it's not always, I don't think it's up to date, but it's pretty good. The canon on my forums, which is an old thing. And the only reason I still have forums on my website is because it has the canon on my website. So I go there to double check things.
The moderators keep it pretty
good. The
good
moderators keep it pretty good. I do run everything through. I've got a couple people who have read them all, and my trusty assistant, but also Elle, who's one of the moderators, has read all the books and somehow keeps she knows more about my characters and my world than I do. And so I run it through them too. I also listen to my books a lot on audio. I'll go through and it was just the very beginning. It was really painful to listen to my books on audio because I had not written them for somebody to read them out loud. And there's a lot of things that I would not have put together if I thought somebody was going to be reading them out loud. And it also makes your mistakes as a writer more painfully obvious as I'm listening to somebody else read my books, and I can't skip forward. I can't go, oh, the scene is so bad. I can't believe the scene is so bad. These characters, they go, as you know, Jim, you know, that kind of thing, you know. And I feel like every book I learn from, and I get to be a better writer. But the bad part of that is that 5 books ago I was not as good a writer as I am now, and so I see things that just make me crazy. But I've listened to them now enough, and it helps really. I've got very good readers. I listen to them now, and it helps me pick out the little little story gems that I throw by the wayside. Oh, someday we might have a story about this, or this little thing will be in here. And that allows me to pull them back into the story. And it also reminds me of characters that otherwise I might have forgotten. So that's helpful too. But I think I think I used to have a really good memory, and that is going by the wayside. I mean, I just have it filled with too much stuff.
Too many important things.
Too many important things, right. That's funny. But I think at some point in time, I'm just going to have to sit down and bite the bullet and do up a series Bible. I just bought a big box with 4x6 cards so that I can write down characters in alphabetical order and what their hair color is, what their eyes are, what kind of things they do, and where they appear in the book, so I can go double check them. I also buy all my books in Kindle. Buy my own books in Kindle, because the way the Kindle app works for me, I can search through things. I can do random weird word searches through that. Works better for me than the and not Kindle, it's Nook. Works better in the Nook app for me than the Kindle app does, and everybody else's experience might be different, but that's a really quick way for me to go through. I can, as I get more books, it's less quick, but I can still, if I have a character who's like this and I can't remember anything about them, and I can go back through and see the scenes that character was in, and that's useful too. I don't know what people who wrote books before the era of computer did. I really don't.
I'm just thinking about you trying to create the series Bible with those 4x6 cards, because I thought about that for my Soul Charmer series, and it's only 3 books, and I'm like, oh, it seems daunting. You know how many books you've written, right, that you will have to pull from for this? That seems like a large task, Patty.
Wild Science book 6 and Alpha and Omega, and then the Mercy book is, I'm on book 13, Sparky?
Yes.
13.
Lucky 13.
Lucky 13. So that's 19 books in the series,
Yeah.
plus the short story collection, and then random short stories as I go along. Yeah, it's got, if I stack them all up, it's a pretty big stack anymore. But it's, if I let that intimidate me, if I let that worry me too much, then I can't go forward. So that's how I started listening to the audiobooks, actually, is I got stuck on one of the books. I'm going, I don't remember enough about what's going on to put this story together. And I thought, well, I can't force myself to sit down. If I sit down and read my own books, because I've edited them so many times, I'll just read right over the top of it. It won't hit my head. So going back and listening to them in audio is a different enough intake that I pay attention, and I can put things together better. But yeah, it's certainly, that is one of the downsides of having long running series, and I'm sure mistakes creep in. I know that they have. It helps a lot that I have Elle and Anne and my friend Deb has gone through and read them for me too. Ann Sowers, my editor at Ace, has read every one of them, but she's kind of like me. She reads so much that it goes in, after a while you don't remember. But I have some copy editors that I've had through that have several of the books in the series, and they're really, really good.
That's really wonderful.
Yeah. So yeah, it's everything you do when you're writing is a give and take. So standalone books are much easier from one standpoint and not nearly as much fun from another one. So.
Sorry, my mic
John,
was
I can't
muted.
hear you.
Sorry, there we go. Good. Okay, so we've got some crowd questions, but before we get to those, Chelsea, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about the Soul Charmer series of yours, since it is urban fantasy, and a little bit about Prom House, your upcoming book?
Sure. Soul Charmer series starts with a book called Borrowed Souls. The basic concept is we've got a girl who has one of those brothers who's always in trouble, and she's always bailing him out. And so to get him out of a hot spot, ends up becoming a repo woman for people who don't return rented souls. So people go and rent souls so they can sin to their heart's content without any celestial consequences. And then her job is to come and take them back from people. And there's a whole lot of dastardly dealings. And then Prom House comes out May 4th. It is a YA thriller. So 10 teens rent a house on the Jersey Shore for prom weekend. They get locked in, and one after the other, people start dying. They start pointing fingers. There's secrets. So if you liked Christopher Pike, kind of Fear Street type books, it's that. It's all murder, kissing, and twists.
I'm so excited because Christopher Pike was my intro into like supernatural fiction and urban fantasy and stuff. So I'm so excited.
Yeah, I just want to do something that was fun thriller.
Okay, so we've got a couple of crowd questions. One of the first, so Tricia says that she is new to urban fantasy. So Tricia, next time you're in the store, come talk to me. We're going to get you set up. But so she says, for somebody new to urban fantasy, Patty, which series would you recommend she starts with? And why do you think your series would be a good intro to the genre?
Okay, so I'm assuming she means of mine, because I could recommend like a dozen really good urban fantasy writers. You'd want to start with Mooncalled, or you could start with Cry Wolf, because both of those are the first of the series. And they would be, they're a good introduction to urban fantasy because they are right in the middle of the genre. It's a melding of, well, it's horror with the fantasy element, so it's horror turned on its side. So it's happy. Yeah, that's not right. It's not happy. It's hopeful. So horror is the genre of speculative fiction that is about hopelessness, and fantasy is about hopefulness. And when you take all of the tropes of horror, like vampires and werewolves and terror and murder and mayhem and torture and things, and then you add the fantasy element of hope into it, it turns it a little bit on its side and makes it, I think, a very interesting take on things that you already know about. It's a nice step into speculative fiction, which is science fiction, fantasy, and horror, because it is grounded in the real world. So people, we pulled in a lot of, when we started writing urban fantasy, we pulled in a lot of romance readers, because there's a lot of romance in urban fantasy. But it's not, it doesn't feel like because we're not building on a different world, we're building on the world in which you get up every morning and go to work. It doesn't feel, they don't feel so lost when they first step in. And then we can take them by the hand and take them to weird places like Underhill and stuff, and torment them that way. But by then they're at home. So it doesn't have, it's not there's a word I'm looking for. There's not a big barrier for readers who are not familiar with speculative fiction.
Yeah, it's a good, like I said, I like to, when you're trying to, expand somebody's reading horizons, you find something that's like this much outside of their reading comfort zone, and then you can push them. And I think it's a good, especially if you're a mystery reader, it's a good place to kind of jump in and start expanding into kind of the more fantasy paranormal stuff. This question says, so somebody's always wondered why the choice of third person for the Alpha and Omega books, but first person for Mercy.
So third person is a little more forgiving, and I can tell stories from different people's perspective. Mercy's first person, because that's what urban fantasy was. When I started writing urban fantasy, that was the nod to the noir. Is that it's told first person, and I really enjoy that. But when they asked me to write a second urban fantasy series, and it's set in the same world with the same mass character cast, I mean, obviously, well, if you read the series, the characters don't often interact, but I needed it to feel differently, because I've been writing these since 2006, I think is when Mooncalled came out. So I've been writing these for 15 years, and it would feel like I was writing the same book for 15 years. And by doing the Alpha and Omega series in third person instead of first person, it really gives me a chance to clean my palette. So it feels like I really am stepping into a different book. And it's, I find it very helpful, and it keeps me fresh and on my toes.
I've got a couple questions too. Are there any talks of doing another short story collection?
Not right now. I have a series of short stories with a seal. I've written 3 of them. 2 of them are published. One of them is coming out in Heroic Hearts, which is coming out, I think, May of 2022. Is that right?
Yes.
May 2022. And eventually, I think I'm going to write a book around those. I am not a short story writer. I have played more in short stories with the Mercy books with Shifting Shadows. I doubled my number of short stories, I think, when I wrote Shifting Shadows. My whole career-wise, short stories. I'm a novelist. That's where my natural storytelling length is. So if I get time and sit down and write more short stories, I'm sure we'll put them out in a collection. In the meantime, I'll take the short stories I have and turn them into a book, because that's how I work.
Chelsea, do you do short stories at all?
Sometimes. I tend to be long-winded as well. I usually have a lot that I want to say and layer in, multiple things. But I'm trying to write more short stories because I think it's a good craft exercise.
So Shawanda wants to know, Patty, how many years have Charles and Anna been together?
I tried to be vague on those. I think, are we on year 4 of the
Mercy series, but they got together before Mercy.
No, they got together at the end of Mooncalled.
Oh, okay.
So they've been together for 4 years.
Okay.
The reason I kind of vague it a little bit is that because I've been writing these for 15 years, if I tie them too tightly to a particular time, it's going to be really uncomfortable. So
that works then, because she says that she had been trying to do the math about how long they had been together and it wasn't adding up. So your vague it's working.
Okay, well good. If you go to my website, and I'm trying to remember, where is that in the website?
PatriciaBriggs.com.
Under PatriciaBriggs.com.
There's a timeline under the books section.
Under the books section, there's a timeline. And that lists all the books in time order, and it starts with year 1 and goes on. And then I think it goes backwards too, because some of the short stories take place a lot earlier than that. Yeah. So it goes backwards too. But I think officially, if we're officially in year 4, I think then that means that Charles and Anna have been together that long, because they started out in between the last chapters of Mooncalled.
Okay, great. So Jana wants to know, Patty, who are some of your biggest inspirations as far as writing goes? Who are the people that made you want to write?
Okay, when I was starting out, the people that I read, so fantasy is Andre Norton, people like Elsbreg de Camp, Anne McCaffrey, people like that, Mercedes Lackey, Carolyn Cherry, or it's CJ Cherry, right? Carolyn's a friend of mine, so I don't always use her nom de plume. Nina Karicki Hoffman, and then other writers in other genres, Dick Francis, Jane Ann Krenz, who writes is about 400 different people. I'm exaggerating, but I think she has like 5 pseudonyms that she has written under. And for a while, it was a game to see how many books you could find under different pseudonyms with my friends and I. Currently, people like Lois McMaster Bujold, if I ever write a book as good as Lois McMaster Bujold's characters, I will retire. She is amazing. I've been re-listening to the Miles for Corsican books. Those are, for those who have not read her, they're science fiction, but again, they're very character driven. A very good science behind all of her stories, but that's not what I read science fiction for, which is sad to say. She's got great characters. In urban fantasy, Jim Butcher, Laurel K. Hamilton, Kelly Armstrong, Kim Harrison, Charlene Harris, Ilona Andrews. I mean, there's just a host of writers that I go to. If I get stuck and I can't write anymore, it feels like it's like there's a well inside you of creativity. And if I get to the point where that well is dry, then I put up and I watch Lord of the Rings. So I don't watch Lord of the Rings anymore from front to back. I just grabbed a random scene and I watch it until I'm ready to go tell stories again. I'm really afraid that someday that's going to lose its magic. It hasn't so far. It's been a number of years, but it is such a great storytelling experience. It's so immersive and so beautiful and so incredible. So as an inspiration for writing, it's there.
And how about you, Chelsea? Who are some of your writing inspirations and touchstones?
I mean, I'll say the reason I ended up writing urban fantasy was definitely Laurel K. Hamilton. Circus of the Damned is probably the reason you get urban fantasy books for me. Just hands down.
We did, and so for any other Laurel K. Hamilton fans that are out there, we did a virtual event with her when the most recent book came out. So you can find that on the store's YouTube, as well as one with Kim Harrison. One really early in the pandemic, I was having a hard time kind of sitting down and focusing and reading. And the thing that kind of jumped me back into it was we found out we had an event tentatively set up for Kim Harrison, and once we realized we were going to have to cancel, it was going to have to be in virtual instead, and I was going to interview her, I realized I was like 3 books behind this new one in the series. And so I just spent like 2 weeks just completely immersing myself back in the Hollows again. And it was so good to kind of be back in that world. And it was sort of the thing that kind of kickstarted my being able to read and my brain working again.
That's like wanting to dive back into the Night Huntress series from Janine Frost as she hits the end of each of the new arcs of the spinoffs.
I love Tanya Huff. I told Tanya about I think the first time I met her, I told her that I said, I want to know what you're going to write now, so I know what to write in 10 years, because her urban fantasy, her Blood Tie series is definitely urban fantasy, and it came out 10 years before urban fantasy was a thing, and it's amazing. It's really, really good stuff.
It's been nice to see, like, Patty, you have not, I don't want to say abandoned us, that implying that other people have abandoned us, but you have consistently been giving us urban fantasy and haven't taken a break where some other people have. But it's nice to see that people that maybe have taken a break from the genre are getting back into it. And it's nice to see that kind of it's starting to be published again and people are reading again, and it's starting to have, like, vampires are back. And it's so good to see the genre that I love kind of get another win, because we know that these publishing things are cyclical, but it's nice to see it's kind of being back on the upswing of that again.
Well, and I think it's really easy. If you've been writing urban fantasy for 10 years, it's really easy to get tired of it. And you want to go back and do something else, or do something different, or do something more. And there's not world enough in time to do everything. So I totally understand it. And we went, it helps me that I'm writing 2 series and that they feel to me very different. I won't swear that I never will write something else, because I have some stories on the back burner that I want to tell that are traditional stories, traditional fantasy stories. And someday I might get tired and go, hey, you know what? I'm ready to write something else. But it's nice to know, I can go out and write something else and come back. That's, I don't think I will at this point. I have no plans to end either of the series. I love what I do. Urban fantasy, like traditional fantasy, but almost more so. I can do anything in urban fantasy. There is nothing that I have learned, nothing I can go out and learn that I can't use in my books. I have friends now who are doing mounted archery, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to bring that into a story, just cool things like that. And I can write any kind of book I want to. I can write a murder mystery. I can write a thriller. I can write a monster book. I can write a ghost story. There's no genre of books that I can't write, except for maybe science fiction. That's not a challenge. I'm not going to try it. But as long as you stay out of the other speculative fiction types, there's no kind of book that I can't write under the aegis of urban fantasy. And that helps keep me fresh. And I think that's really fun.
And I think that's one of the great things about the genre, because you have people like Jay Wells, who are their Prospero's War series, threw in a lot more police procedural elements. And then you have like Janine Frost, who leans a little bit more towards the romance end. And it's so great that there are so many flavors that you can just add in, and it's still at the core. It's like the genre, but there's so much room to play with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Chelsea, we talked about Prom House, and that's what you've got coming out in May. And as I wanted to reiterate for everybody that's watching, if you want to order copies, you can visit murderbooks.com. She's going to be personalizing books and signing books for us. So please head to the website and order those. So Patty, I know that Wild Sign has just come out. It's only been out for not even a week yet, but what do you have coming up next?
So the next book is a Mercy book. It's called Soul Taken. And it takes place around Halloween, which we're not emphasizing because it comes out in March, right? but I have, this one is a take on the urban myth. We have an urban myth that comes, which is the Soul Taker. And it involves, I think this is not a spoiler because it happens like in the first 10 pages of the first chapter. Mercy has a stalker. Wolf the vampire has decided that he's going to be her stalker, and he's reading up on how to be a stalker and doing the stalkery things, and which would be cute and charming if Wolf wasn't really kind of crazy and scary. But he has disappeared, and nobody knows what happened to him. And the mistress of the vampires thinks that one of the werewolves has taken him out because he's stalking Mercy. And in order to keep the power structure that allows the Tri-Cities to be safe between the Fae and the werewolves and the vampires and the humans and all of the creepy things that are there, the vampires and the werewolves have to work together. And in order to preserve that partnership, Mercy has to go figure out what happened to Wolf. And that's how that story happens.
So that reminded me one more question I want to ask. This will be the last one before we let you guys loose for the evening. So all of the books in both series have 2-word titles. Can you talk a little bit about the process of trying to figure out which 2 words are going to fit with the theme of like the naming the books? Is it hard? How do you come up with them?
So the Mercy ones are actually harder than the Alpha Mega. Alpha Mega just has to be 2 words. And we try to keep them vaguely hunting themes, like, Cry Wolf, Wild Sign is a hunting term. Fair Play is not, and Dead Heat is not. But still, they're kind of thrillerly titles and that kind of stuff, right? The Mercy books are harder. It has to be a noun. And then my grammar is so far in the back. I use it, but I can't remember the term. So a noun and a past participle, I think. Moon called, blood bound, iron kissed, right? And so we throw up words. We go, at the start of this, about the time I'm finishing up Wild Sign, Ann Sowards, my editor, will say, hey, Patty, it's about time to start looking at covers for the next book, and what's the book going to be about? And I go, okay, well, it's kind of vaguely this way, and I throw up every word I can think of, and we save those sometimes. Let's see, Storm Cursed was actually a title that we played around with for the book before that, and decided that Storm Curse worked better for a witch book. And so we got to save that one, and so we didn't have the trauma of finding a new title the next time. But in general, it's usually a group effort. Once the book started hitting the New York Times, then we start to have permission from the powers that be in Penguin for the title. We can't just come off the cuff. Some of the titles I've come up with, Moon Called was mine. Bloodbound, I think, was Ann Sowards. I can't remember who Iron Kissed was. I think it might have been Ann Sowards. Some of them, it was a combination. Burn Bright. I start out with Burning Bright from the Tiger, Burning Bright, Forest with the Night. But there was another book coming out that was Burning Bright, and there were several others. I thought, well, Burn Bright works. So that happened there. No, it is a process, and trying to find something that is different from everybody else's and still feels very in center of the genre sometimes is a long process.
I love that there's a list, because whenever I talk with cozy writers, I just imagine that publishers have like potential like spreadsheets full of potential titles that they can run by, especially for cozy, since they're all kind of pun related. So I love that there is like a potential running list of Patricia Briggs titles just in case.
We also have a running list of bad Patricia Briggs titles, like Flea Bitten,
Curtailed.
Curtailed. Right.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us this evening. This has been so great. I'm so sorry that we can't actually like do it shoulder to shoulder packed in the store, but I'm so glad that we're able to do it this way.
I'm hopeful for next year. I'm really hopeful for next year. John, thank you. And Chelsea, thank you very much. This has been really fun.
Yeah. So I wanted to mention, if anybody came in late, I saw a couple people mention that they were going to have to duck out. If anybody came in late, once we are done, Facebook and YouTube will archive this video, so it'll be up to watch. Sometimes YouTube takes just a little bit longer because there's some extra encoding stuff that it needs to take, but it'll be up there for you to watch later. As we mentioned, we still have some signed copies of Wild Sign available. You can pre-order copies of Chelsea's Prom House. If I didn't mention it at the beginning, Murder by the Book is open for people to come in, so you're welcome to come in and browse as long as you're masked. We're still limiting the number of people in the store at a time just for social distancing reasons. So if you pull up and the parking lot's full, maybe poke your head in and just see where we're at capacity-wise. But definitely come in and see us. If anybody else out there is like Tricia, who is new into urban fantasy, come visit me. I will hook you up. We can start you with Patty's books. We can start you with Chelsea's books. There's so much urban fantasy stuff out there. Nothing makes me happier than pulling stuff out of my little fantasy section to sell to people.
I really miss coming to your store. Sparky, my trusty assistant, does too, because we always leave with boxes of books that you recommend.
Extra suitcase.
Extra suitcases, yeah. Sparky. Next time we have to do that. We've had to mail books. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. You guys really know your stuff, and you come up with, you find new authors every time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. So thank you again, both. Everybody take care, and we will see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.